president, just like Nixon did during another tumultuous era for civil rights. Here's how that sounded back then.
When the nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness, when a nation has been known for a century for equality of opportunity is torn by unprecedented racial violence, and when the President of the United States cannot travel abroad or to any major city at home without fear of a hostile demonstration, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America.
Sound familiar? Well, 52 years later, Donald Trump making virtually the same arguments by blaming the Democrats for the ongoing chaos and violence and claiming Republicans alone can fix it.
In the strongest possible terms, the Republican Party condemns the rioting, looting, arson, and violence we have seen in Democrat-run cities all, like Kenosha, Minneapolis, Portland, Chicago, and New York, and many others, Democrat-run. There is violence and danger in the streets of many Democrat-run cities throughout America. This problem could easily be fixed if they wanted to. Just call. We're ready to go in. We'll take care of your problem in a matter of hours. Just call.
White House correspondent John Harwood joining me now. And John, whichever side of the fence you sit, there must be Democrats who are concerned that this current social unrest in the states strengthens Donald Trump's hand, particularly amongst swing voters, correct?
Well, Becky, it's certainly a lot harder for that to work for Donald Trump than it was for Richard Nixon in 1968. And the reason for that is that Richard Nixon was not the president. Donald Trump is the president. And though he was trying to raise the specter, as other Republican speakers were, of danger in Joe Biden's America, this is Donald Trump's America where these events are unfolding. That having been said, the more there is attention to violence on the part of protesters, the less sympathy there will be in the broader population for those protests, because this summer we saw a considerable amount of public sympathy for Black Lives Matter, even among white voters who previously had not been sympathetic. But the more there is violence and disorder in the streets, the more possibility, at least, the president has of making the case that his side of cracking down, even though, again, these things are happening on his watch, is the correct side, that he can frighten enough white voters into supporting him. We've seen that over the course of his presidency, Becky, his poll numbers have been remarkably stable. People have been watching Donald Trump very closely for a long time, so it's very difficult to change perceptions of him. If he can somehow change perceptions about what's happening in the country and that he is a superior vehicle for dealing with those than Joe Biden, maybe he can have an effect, but we're going to have that proven.
Reflect for us, if you will, on what we have heard then, both from Donald Trump at what is, of course, slugged as the Republican National Convention, but it was clearly a Donald Trump convention, and what we heard last week from the Democrats. Where are we at, John?
Well, going into the conventions, we were in the polls the same place we are at least this morning. That is, with Joe Biden having a significant advantage, well outside the margin of error, in the 8 to 10 point range nationally, while also having leads, narrower leads, but leads nevertheless, in more than enough of the battleground states to win the election. Last week, we had Joe Biden trying to present himself as a unifier in the country and display the energy and drive to be able to resolve some of the problems that America is facing now. What you saw from President Trump was an attempt again to inflame some of the divisions in the country, to cast himself on one side of those divisions, and also wield, as you suggested in the opening, just outrageous misrepresentations of the person that he's running against. You know, the idea that Joe Biden is a pro-criminal and anti-law enforcement is just ridiculous. The idea that Joe Biden would usher in a socialist form of government in the United States is simply ridiculous. But this president has not been constrained by the truth, and he wasn't last night.
John Howard's at the White House for us. Thank you, John. Well, tens of thousands of Americans are gathering right there in Washington this hour. They will march towards the Lincoln Memorial to call attention to voting rights, dismantling racism, and ending police violence. It's being dubbed the Commitment March. Get your knee off our necks. That, of course, is in reference to George Floyd, who died in May after police pinned him to the ground for nearly 9 minutes. And it also comes in the wake of the shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. Well, today's march also comes on the anniversary of a seminal moment. Exactly 57 years ago, history was made on those steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 250,000 people gathered to listen to Martin Luther King Jr. as he spoke the words, "I have a dream." In some ways, a lot has changed since that famous speech. In others, much has stayed the same as Americans once again march for justice. And that takes us into the racial unrest that we are seeing in Wisconsin, not decades or years ago, but instead right now. In 2020, August of 2020. There, the suspect in Tuesday's fatal protest shooting is set to appear in court virtually this hour. 17-year-old Carl Rittenhouse is charged with killing 2 people and wounding another during protests. He faces multiple felony charges. Meanwhile, the black man who sparked the demonstrations remains hospitalized. Jacob Blake, shot in the back 7 times by a police officer. Even though he's partially paralyzed, his family says he is being kept shackled to his bed. Blake's father spoke to CNN a short while ago in an exclusive, emotional interview. Jacob Blake Sr. said his son has a long battle ahead.
His fight will never end because of 7 shots. Not 7 shots because my son did something aggressive to anyone. It was the over-aggressiveness of a Caucasian police officer with 7 shots out of his weapon that has caused this whole incident. We are against the violence and burning and looting, but it was started by 7 shots.
The latest now on the volatile situation playing out in Wisconsin.
Jacob Blake's family says he is lying in his hospital bed, handcuffed after Officer Rustin Chesky shot him in the back 7 times.
Jacob Blake's father said that he was glad to see his son awake, but that his son's first question or first words to him were, "Daddy, why did they shoot me so many times?" He said, "Why is my son chained up?" And there's obviously no reasonable explanation for why someone who is paralyzed from the waist down would have handcuffs on.
Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers says he doesn't know why either.
He's paid a horrific price already, being shot 7 or 8 times in the back. So I can't imagine why that's happening.
Still very few answers from authorities, officials choosing not to take questions after saying very little in a press conference. Meanwhile, more charges have been filed against 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who is accused of fatally shooting 2 people and seriously injuring another. Along with first-degree intentional homicide and reckless homicide, Rittenhouse faces 3 additional felony charges, plus a misdemeanor charge of possession of a dangerous weapon while under the age of 18. If convicted, Rittenhouse could face life in prison.
These armed men who have no connection to even this state. That guy's from my town. So think about how ridiculous that is. Who is he accountable to? Nobody. And for him to even be able to shoot somebody and still walk away from the scene. I mean, you know, they talked about finding a knife inside of the car, not even on Jacob Blake's person, but this guy's carrying around a long gun, killed somebody, just walking freely, was able to get back home to Illinois. Then, you know, we got a much bigger problem on our hands.
The two victims from Tuesday's shooting are 36-year-old Joseph Rosenbaum and 26-year-old Anthony Huber. Huber's great aunt tells the New York Times Anthony knew Jacob Blake, his girlfriend Hannah Giddings, on why Huber charged the gunman.
I will not let him have died for nothing. Like, people are going to know exactly why we were out there and exactly what he was fighting for. He was going to protect me and protect everybody around him.
Well, that was Shimon Prokopez reporting for you. Well, now we have seen Joe Biden pulling ahead of Donald Trump in poll after poll in the all-important swing state of Michigan. A CNN poll last month put Biden 12 points ahead of the president. That was just before the Democratic and Republican convention.
I want to stop this right here. Let's back up. Let's back up. Let's go all the way back to the front of this program whenever I first started filming it. Whenever they was talking about Nixon. Let's go over one thing and then go over another.
The rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness. When a nation has been known for a century for equality of opportunity is torn by unprecedented racial violence, and when the President of the United States cannot travel abroad or to any major city at home without fear of a hostile demonstration, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America.
Sound familiar?
It does sound familiar, but it's taken out of context. And the reason why it's taken out of context is because Mr. Nixon was running to be the president of the United States versus somebody that already is the president of the United States. You see, Donald Trump don't think that we're smart enough to figure him out whenever it comes to manipulating words and taking things out of context pertaining to manipulating events. Whenever you're sitting there accusing Biden falsely, you're only showing your ignorance because it's on his watch. It's on Trump's watch that's the violence is escalating on. It's not escalating on Biden's watch. Biden's the one that's wanting to come into power so that he can stop the looting and the burning and the lawlessness that's going on. Trump's got it twisted, and he don't think that we're smart enough to identify what he's trying to do. He's manipulating the truth. And by him manipulating the truth, people need to wake up to what he's actually doing. The fault falls upon the feet of those that's already in power, not those that's trying to become in power. This is going on right now on his watch. It's not going on Biden's watch. It's going on Mr. Trump's watch. And to think that he thinks that we're not smart enough to figure him out shows you his ignorance towards what kind of a person that he truly is, towards trying to take things out of proper context in regard to the point that we're living in today. There's no doubt the people in 1968 was a completely different people. Those was the people that was struggling for equality. Those was also the people that was going through what they was going through pertaining to the hippie era, pertaining to the Woodstock era. But at the same time, you have to recognize this group of people, which I'm going to put them in the category of basically America, are the people that held tight to the values of knowing how things was during the 40s and the 50s after World War II towards people not lashing out this way. Now, granted, this same group of people here had not yet come full circle in understanding the equality that Black Lives Matter. That's the reason why that the civil rights movements that was occurring down in the South was happening, because it was barbaric, it was cruel, it was insensitive. But the same thing 50 years later is happening today, and we see this lashing out with various police agencies that does not treat the black man like he does the white man. And because that, now we're seeing a repeat. It's in a different way, but we're seeing a repeat of the protest that's either coming in the form of bad protesting, good protesting, or now I've seen to where the sports is starting to get involved towards protesting, because they have a pretty big mic themselves in protesting pertaining to this equal quality. And there's no doubt that equal quality has not been fairly fared in the past 50 years since the first outbreak happened back in 1968. But once more, to give you an example of what kind of president that we have, Mr. Trump thinks that he can use the same punchline that people like Nixon used, even though Nixon was running to become president while Trump is already president. That's the part that I'm trying to make in regards to this. It shows you how manipulative and how dishonest that Trump really is towards thinking that he can pull the wool over the American people's eyes. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I repeat, it's not going to work. You know, he can get up there and he can boast all he wants, and he can falsely accuse all he wants, and he can bring up all the lies and all the innuendos that he wants. But the fact of the matter is, this thing has fell apart, and it has fell apart on his watch. It didn't fall apart on Biden's watch. It didn't fall apart on Obama's watch. It didn't fall apart on Bill Clinton's watch. It fell apart on Donald Trump's watch. This will be what this president is remembered by. The historians, 50, 75, 100 years ago, whenever the majority of us that's living right now are dead and gone. This will be how they judge, how they monitor, how they gauge this presidential event versus other presidential events. This will be how they gauge Donald Trump. The people that will come in after we're all dead, the majority of us is dead and gone. It just shows you the mentality, the mental mentality that Donald Trump is trying to pull over the American people's eyes towards pulling the wool over our eyes. It shows you what type of true president that Donald Trump really is. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump hadn't done some good things, and Donald Trump has brought in a lot of things that needed to be brought in pertaining to the abuse in the system. There was lots of abuses that was going on in the system that needed to be checked on. Just like the taxes, turning the taxes that China wasn't paying, now turning them into tariffs. There's been other countries that Donald Trump has noticed that these events was going on, and he's basically turned the tables. That should have been done 2 or 3 or 4 administrations ago. Possibly even further back than that. You know, like us paying for all the security over in Germany, and the UN not wanting to pay their end. I mean, these things that Donald Trump brought out to the American people was accurate. And they was fair towards making sure that other parties paid their part. I've been told, I don't know how truthful that it is, because it's got to the point with the propaganda going on. You don't know what to believe, what not to believe. But I've been told that there hasn't been 300 miles of wall put up down on the border. But then again, I've been told that there has been 300 miles a border on the border. So which story do you believe? Do you believe that there has been or there hasn't been? But once more, I give Donald Trump 2 thumbs up towards identifying that there was a problem pertaining to the immigrants that was slipping over the Rio Grande, not by the hundreds, but by the tens of thousands. That's the reason why we have so many illegal immigrants over here in the United States right now that does not have no paperwork. I agree with Donald Trump on that. He done the right thing towards fact checking that and supposedly building a wall. Now, I don't know how much of the wall that he's gotten built. And I never would have thought that I would have thought that. Because in the beginning, I didn't think that. Because I didn't realize that there was that many illegal immigrants that was coming over the border. But whenever you get to looking at the span of about 30, 35 years, you know, whenever you got 25 or 30 immigrants over here in the United States from Mexico, and over half of them are illegal, they don't have proper paperwork, well, yeah, there's been a problem going on. That's been a problem throughout various administrations that those administrations failed the people on. So I do give Donald Trump credit where credit is due. But I also am not going to sit here and give credit to somebody that is basically trying to manipulate the people and trying to convince us that this whole thing is because of the Democrats, because the Democrats are not in power right now. And he can say whatever he wants to say about these Democrat towns or Democrat cities, but the fact of the matter is, in just every town, every city, you got Republicans and Democrats. You got just as many Republicans that's in power, that's doing things, that's making choices, that you do Democrats. It's a way to draw the American people into an event and then prejudge various people about the event as if you didn't have nothing to do with the event yourself. It's a form of true manipulation of what he is trying to do to the American people. And it's very, very unfair to the American people, because the vast majority of the American people aren't going to be intelligent enough to figure it out towards what he's actually doing. In other words, it's as if Donald Trump himself is an arsonist. Okay, he's an arsonist, and I think I remember this movie called Backdraft that had this type of illness. But it's as if Donald Trump is an arsonist, but he's working for the fire department. Okay, and he goes and makes this fire, and this building is on fire. But yet now here comes Donald Trump with a water hose towards going to put it out, towards making himself look like that he's the hero. When the whole time it wasn't Donald Trump that was the hero, because it was Donald Trump that was catching the buildings on fire to begin with. It's really, really sad how people think that they can manipulate other people by doing stuff idiotically in behind their back. One of the reasons why that I feel like that I've been chosen here in the state of Tennessee of doing what I'm doing is simply because of what led into the execution of Martin Luther King back years ago. And I have always looked at that in the event itself of it being totally wrong, even before I even come into the light pertaining to thou shalt not kill, of honoring the Heavenly Father through the Son Jesus Christ. But now, since I'm realizing that Black lives does in fact matter, I'm now understanding the depth of where these people have been coming from and have been coming from for years, pertaining to inequality based around color that America to this day is still guilty of.
Ago, history was made on those steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 250,000 people gathered to listen to Martin Luther King Jr. as he spoke the words, "I have a dream." In some ways, a lot has changed since that famous speech
And because of that event is what basically put a death sentence to Martin Luther King, because from that day on, certain people in the United States was scared to death of Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King they finally realized that Martin Luther King had a voice. They finally realized that Martin Luther King was going to have an influence on America's society. And from then on, they plotted to kill Martin Luther King. It was the same type of scenario that happened with Jesus. Whenever Jesus went into the synagogue, the temple, and said that my Father's house is not a house of merchandise, but a house of worship. And Jesus throwed a hissy and turned over the money changers and made them look bad. He made the big wigs look bad. From then on, they basically was plotting. They had always been plotting towards trying to find fault in Jesus, but from then on, they wasn't just plotting to find fault. They was plotting to kill Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ had showed them up, and plus, they didn't want Jesus Christ to become influential to the point that they would have to deal with Jesus Christ. It's the exact same thing that happened to Martin Luther King. Once Martin Luther King showed his abilities towards being able to formigate a crowd, especially 250,000 crowd, people in the United States become frightened to death of Martin Luther King, and basically just a few days, weeks, whatever, I don't know the exact timeline, but shortly after that is whenever that man was assassinated right down here on the streets of Memphis. So this equality that we're talking about is in fact a disease that come over to America during the European reign of King George IV, that brought this inadequacy of viewing each other in a very, very sick form. And to this day, it still hasn't been overcome. It still has not been truly overcome, because we can see how that the black man is treated differently than the white man. There is no ifs, there is no ands about it. So whenever the team players, regardless whether it's football, basketball, other types of sports, whenever they make a stand in solidarity, they know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're doing it for the benefit of not necessarily their generation that they're living in, but the generation below them, and to where that their sons and daughters and their grandsons and their granddaughters possibly won't have to go through the same type of abuse, being violated, being treated like they're second to none, being looked upon like they're scum, being treated like they're some sort of a pleasurable foreign item, like they're some sort of an alien. This is what the white race has done to the black race here in America. I don't know, I think it's still going on in other parts of Europe and other parts of the world, but it's wrong whenever you judge a person off of the color of their skin versus their character. It's very wrong. And it's the very same thing that they have done to me right here in Northwest Tennessee. They have judged me for various reasons, And because of it, to this day, the windmill ministry still does not have a Joel Osteen following. It still, to this day, does not have a 45, 50,000 membership following that supports the windmill ministries. But yet, no, they'll tell you, oh yeah, we want peace, we want love, we want prosperity. Yeah, for yourselves maybe, for your own personal families. But whenever it comes to other people, and the abusiveness that other people are going through, they could literally care less. Literally care less. And I'm not saying that all of them are like that, but once more, the proof is in the pudding. You don't see people knocking down my door. You don't hear my phone blowing up every day towards people wanting to become a part of the windmill ministries. And because of it, I have no other inkling but to think what I think about the people that could be engaged in the windmill ministries. We're talking about people that has kicked me off to the curb now for 30 plus years because they refuse to interpret the Bible correctly. They refuse to accept the Bible for what the Bible is teaching. They'll tell you, well, none of that stuff in Revelations is dealing with us right now because we're going to all be gone. I've heard that now for 40-something, 50-something years right here in the Bible Belt area. Well, guess what? We're all still here. Most of us are. There's a few of us that's been thinned out. But they'll tell you, well, that ain't meant for the churches of today. That's meant for the churches during the Great Tribulation period. Well, if it was meant for the churches of the Great Tribulation period, how come God is telling the 7 churches in the first 4 chapters of Revelations that he will throw they off into Great Tribulation? If it's not meant for the churches of today. Sure, it's meant for the churches of today. It's not only meant for the churches of today, but it's also going to be meant for the churches during the time that God has thrown this world, this planet off into Great Tribulation. But to sit there and deny and then not support somebody that does believe in the premillennial is one thing, but these people took it a step further towards actually attacking me the same way that they have attacked other activists in the world, regardless whether they was black activists or white activists. You know, whenever you get to studying various leaders that has brought forth a spiritual movement in this nation, the majority of them have went through great horror, great resistance, regardless whether it was through the Methodist movement, the Baptist movement, the Church of Christ, the Assembly of God movement. All these different churches, men that got together with groups of people, went through great resistance because people didn't want to hear what these men had to say. And these people, these men, most of them was men, there's been a few women that's done the same thing, but most of them had to persevere through thick and thin before their message finally caught on of that in which what they believed in become acceptable with the masses. What does this? What formigates this type of resistance? I think it's based around out of sight, out of mind. I think it's based around that old cliche that if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, guess what? America's broke. America has been broken for quite some times. That's the reason why my brother and I put up the broken cross out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. We've known that the system was broken. as we sit there and watch our national debt go higher and higher and higher as we go deeper and deeper in the hole. But yet now we have a society that's still in denial about that. The same way as other societies was in denial about other things. The same way as Donald Trump being in denial that all this chaos that has occurred in 2020 has happened on his watch. It's really sad whenever you get to looking at how history repeats itself again and again and again.
As much has stayed the same as Americans once again march for justice. And that takes us into the racial unrest that we are seeing in Wisconsin. I'm
going to leave it there rather than her repeat herself. Nobody should have to be shot in the back 7 times. The judicial system up there can try to act like that it's not a big deal, but the fact of the matter is it is a big deal. And the fact of the matter is it's been going on now all over America, regardless whether it be the southern states, the northern states, or the western states now for quite some time. And it needs to be addressed and it needs to stop. Good luck to all of us, and shalom.